Hey there guys, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new, make sure you hit the subscribe button. So for today's video, I am going to be discussing and breaking down all the various types of beauty blender, beauty sponges, whatever you like to call them, dupes on the market right now. If you guys are subscribed to my channel, which you all should be, you guys will know that I am such a huge fan of the Fenty beauty sponge, and I use that one quite frequently. I did use it in my recent upload where I showed you my in-depth foundation routine. I will leave a link for it right up here. And it got me thinking that if I love the Fenty sponge so much in comparison to the beauty blender, it got me wondering if all the other dupes out there on the market were just as great or better than the beauty blender itself. So I went out, I got a slew of different beauty blenders to test and try out for you guys. So we're gonna go through the whole shebang. I'm talking the squishability of the sponge, because to a lot of people that's like the most important factor of a sponge. The size of it when it's dry versus when it's wet, the texture of it, how well it blends, and if it sucks up a lot of your product or if it just flat out sucks overall. That's what we're going to be discussing and breaking down today. I would love to know your thoughts on beauty blender dupes, what you guys think of them. Let me know what your favorite one is in the comments down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure you guys go ahead and give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe for future videos. Also hit the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload. But without further ado, if you guys are excited to see what my thoughts are on all of these beauty sponges, then let's go ahead and dive right on in. So first up and foremost, the OG, the queen, the Beyonce of sponges, the original beauty blender. This one comes in at about $20, which is a little pretty price tag for a sponge. It's almost kind of like ridiculous because it's $20 for a sponge. And at first, before I ever bought into the hype of the beauty blender, I just could not believe that something like this was going to be worth that big price tag. Before I bought my first beauty blender, I just could not understand the price, why it was so expensive for a freaking sponge. But then when you buy one and you use it and you understand why it's amazing and why it is the way it is, you kind of come to justify the price tag, especially back then because there weren't as many dupes out there as there are now, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the reason that it has so much hype around it is because it's regarded as one of the best sponges out there on the market. Still to this day, it's recommended by a ton of makeup artists in the industry, and it also has the best of all the factors we're examining today. It's slightly porous, but not too porous. It has a great shape with a very tapered end to it, and then it has a nice round butt at the other end so you can use it to blend out your foundation and your concealer really well and get right there on the inner corner of the eye. It also retains water really well so you can make your foundations a little bit more dewy if you want to, or sheer them out even. I personally am an advocate of the beauty blender. I love this one. I honestly cannot go without one, and I know that it comes in such a variety of colors. I personally don't ever see a difference in any of them, besides the fact that I think the black one is just a tad bit softer than all the other ones. That's really the only difference that I see in them. I just have the nude one because it doesn't look as dirty when you're using foundation with it, since it kind of blends into my foundations. Like I said, I cannot go without a beauty blender. It's one that I always had to have on hand because I know it's gonna work. It's a fail-proof one. And honestly, when this one comes to the end of this life, I probably will go out and purchase another one because it really is the tits. Next up, we have the reason that I'm doing this video. The one that is one of my personal favorites is the Fenty Beauty Precision Makeup Sponge. This one is one of my favorites for many of reasons. It has its cons, but it also has a ton of pros in my opinion. It comes at around $16, so it's not that much cheaper than the beauty blender itself, but it will save you a couple bucks in the long run. I personally love it because it's a lot softer than the beauty blender. It's really malleable and squishy, and it's not as porous as the beauty blender is. However, the con with having it be so soft and malleable is that it absorbs a ton a product. I find that it absorbs almost half my foundation when I'm applying it on my skin, which is not something that a lot of people like. They definitely don't want to sheer out their foundations and they feel like they're wasting a lot of product. And I also find that when I'm trying to clean this sponge, I have a hard time because it really stains it and it just does not want to come out. So that really shows how much product is really absorbing into the sponge. It also doesn't have a tapered tip, which is my other con to it, because you kind of have to really sit there and work to blend out your concealer, especially with me in my small inner corner corners. I had to really work to blend it out. However, if you're using this flat side for baking, it's really great for that, kind of chiseling out your cheekbones. And I also will say when you're cleaning it as well too, you have to be extra careful, because if you were anywhere near rough with this thing, or if you use a cleaning mat like you would brushes on this thing, it will tear, because I did have that problem before getting ready for this video, that mine tore a little bit. So you do have to be precautious with it. Other than all those cons, I still love it because of how it makes my foundation look. I find that it makes my foundation look even more airbrushed than the Beauty Blender does, which says a lot because that one is so heavily regarded. I love the flat edge to it to really press my foundation into my skin, and I feel like it just allows me to work it really nicely into my skin. I love how soft it feels, even though that does allow for it to absorb a lot of excess product. I really find that it just works my foundation a lot better. It also retains a little bit more water than the Beauty Blender does, so it allows for my foundations to look a little bit more dewier in the long run. I know when Rihanna was designing this sponge, she said she really wanted to ensure that the texture and the bounce was just right and perfect for it, and that it really would allow for you to get into all the angles and different crevices on your skin. However, I just can't really get into my inner corners. That's the only part that I find really difficult with this sponge. Other than that, I still love it. I still use it. Do I like it more than the other sponges we're testing out today? You'll see. I love a lot of other sponges that are in this video, but nothing can really just come as close to as soft as this one is and how malleable it is, which is my overall win for this product. The Real Technique sponge is regarded as the ultimate dupe for the Beauty Blender. It's heavily regarded as the best dupe out of all the ones that are on the market, and I honestly took forever to try this one out. I didn't want to believe it. I had heard such mixed reviews from a lot of people. Half the people love it. They rave about it. They say it's better than the Beauty Blender. And the other half of people aren't such a fan of it. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle with this sponge. It does come in at about $6, which is a fantastic price in comparison to the first two sponges we talked about. However, there are some cons I have with it that make me not love it as much as those. But I particularly like using this with powders, like my powder foundation, because it doesn't retain a lot of water, so I can really use that to kind of press onto my skin without making my powder foundation look very cakey or heavy. It also is great for baking as well too, since it has this nice tapered tip to it. I can really dip it into the powder and really press it underneath the eyes, and it doesn't really make my under eyes look too cakey either. I also think it's really malleable, it's very squishy, it's really soft, it's not as porous as the Beauty Blender, but it's not as soft as the Fenty Beauty Sponge is. However, when it comes to liquid foundations, that's where I have a problem with it. I find that it absorbs a plethora of excess product, especially with my powder foundations too. I still like to use it because it really doesn't allow for my foundation to look too heavy, but it will absorb a ton of my excess powder foundations and my liquid foundations. So that is one of my main cons with this one. It also doesn't tend to stay that very damp, which is one reason why I like to use it with powders versus liquids, because when I'm using a liquid foundation and a sponge, I really like for that sponge to stay damp, so I feel like I have more time to sit there and work with my liquid foundation, whereas when it's too dry, I find that I don't have a lot of work time and it just makes my foundation look a little bit heavier and a little bit too matte for my liking. So I'm kind of conflicted. I'm not on the side where I completely hate it, because I do see some use for it. Obviously, I've been using it since I got it, but I would not recommend it for liquid foundation. If you are someone that strictly only wears powder foundation, or you like to use a separate sponge for baking, this is a sponge that I would definitely recommend for it, that you don't feel like you need to throw away, because it's only $6, so you really can't afford to have an extra sponge if you want. So I have another sponge from Real Techniques. It is their Miracle Diamond Sponge. This one goes for about $10, and right now I think it's at Ulta, but it has a different coloring to it. This is just one that I picked up from Kohl's. It has a nice gray and white marbling to it, but the one I think that's out now is purple and pink marbling. I'm not positive though. Anyways, it's still for the same price. It's still $10. You can pick it up at Ulta or Kohl's or Real Techniques' website. It's the same texture and density as the original Real Techniques sponge. However, I don't find it to be as malleable as the original Real Techniques sponge, and one reason being is because you have all these multiple facets on it. It's really made, and it's made for you to be able to use these different facets for different things, but I honestly just don't see the point of them. You have this more flimsier tip to it, so you can't really use it to get into the inner corner of the eye and really kind of blend out your concealer well, because it just flops around. It doesn't really blend out anything. And then I have the flat edge to it, which it's great for blending out foundation, but since it has the same texture as the Real Technique sponge, it's going to absorb a ton of that excess product. It doesn't stay damp as well either. It is really soft, but I just don't find that it works better than the other Real Technique sponge. You're basically just paying for the design of it. That's essentially it. That's it. It's all marketing. That's it. So next up, I have 3 sponges that all have the exact same shape to it. This is a very popular shape when it comes to makeup sponges. I find it's almost like the Beauty Blender, but it's not quite the same shape of it. So we're going to talk about each 3 of these. So my favorite out of this shape of sponges is the L'Oreal Infallible Blend Artist Sponge. This particular one I've actually been using for about a week now to use for my foundation, and I absolutely love it. I have been reaching for my Fenty one actually, and this has quickly become one of my favorite ones to use. This one retails at $8. It's very soft. It's not too porous. However, it does absorb a ton of my product. That's the main con I have with this one. Other than that, I love it. So that's the only thing. If you are worried about your sponge absorbing a lot of product, this is probably one I would not reach for. However, I see what the hype is about. I know a ton of other YouTubers like to use this sponge as well. It gives a nice poreless finish to the skin. It's really soft and very malleable. You can get into the inner corner underneath your eyes. And while it does absorb a lot of your foundation, it also retains a lot of water, so you can get a nice dewy finish with the skin. I find that it can work with a variety of different foundations as well, and it's just as soft as the Fenty one. So in my book, this is one of the best dupes out there of all the ones we're testing out today. I really love this one, and I will probably continue to reach for this one. The only con, like I said, is that it just absorbs a ton of your product, so you do have to be careful and be cautious about that part. I also love using this to blend out my bronzer as well too, since it is soft and it has a nice rounder butt. I can really blend out my bronzer with it really nicely and really get a nice soft focus to the skin. My second favorite of this shape is probably the Morphe Flawless Beauty Sponge. And this one, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I don't know if I got a dud, but I don't like this one as much as the L'Oreal one for a kind of plethora of reasons. I really wish I got the highlighting and contouring one that Jaclyn Hill uses a lot, but my Ulta was sold out of that one, so I had to settle for getting the Flawless Beauty one. And it's really great, and originally was a lot like the L'Oreal one, but I had a couple issues with it after washing it, and it hasn't really returned to its original form in a way. For some reason, I've just found ever since I washed it that it does not want to go back to its original shape. It also doesn't have that tapered of an edge, so I can't really get into my inner corner and blend out my concealer that well. It's very dense, but it's also kind of soft, so it does eat up a lot of product. Not as much as the L'Oreal and Fenty one does, but it does eat up a ton of my foundation, and I find that I have a really hard time getting it out while I'm cleaning it. And the main thing that happens when I clean it is that the red dye will just come off of it and stain my hand. So I will say you do need to be cautious about that when you are washing these. And then my least favorite out of these 3 is the e.l.f. Blending Sponge. While this is one of the cheapest ones out of all the ones I tested out, it does come out to $5. It's not the best one. I really just did not enjoy this one whatsoever. Out of all the ones we tested out, this is the one that eats up the most foundation. I found that I had to use twice as much foundation to use this sponge because it just immediately absorbs it. I also find that it retains a ton of water, so I feel like it's just like a puddle sitting at the bottom of the sponge, and no matter how much I blend it out, my foundation will start separating because there's so much water mixed into it, and then it will just eat up the rest of it into the sponge. It has a medium density and squishability to it, and it does taper out really nicely, but I don't find it to be best to blend out my concealer because it does apply kind of patchy to it. And in comparison to the Morphe and L'Oreal one, it's not as squishy and as soft as that one is. And in my opinion, it's just not good enough. It has too many negative qualities for me to sit there and work with it, and you're essentially just getting what you pay for. Like the Beauty Blender, you get what you pay for, you get that high quality, but with the low end as well too, you're essentially getting what you pay for, which is not the best sponge out of the bunch. So next up, I have one that I found was the closest to the actual Beauty Blender. It was the best dupe I could find, and it is the EcoTools Total Perfecting Blender Sponge. This comes in at about $6 as well too, and I found this to be the best one because it has the exact same texture as a beauty blender. It's slightly porous, so you're going to get that nice application with it. It doesn't retain too much water. It also is very soft and really malleable. The texture of it is amazing, and I really find that I can blend out my foundation really quickly with the size of it as well too. This is one of the biggest ones that I had, and I found that it was even bigger than the beauty blender. So with the total surface of it, I really could blend out my foundation really quickly. I can even chisel out my bronzer and bake with it as well too. Since you have these two slanted edges on it, I could use one for foundation and then the other one for powder and really chisel out my cheekbones. Really great for baking underneath the eyes as well too, and really blending out those contours and bronzer shades. Like the Fenty one, it doesn't have it tapered into it. However, I feel like this one you could really be more malleable with it and kind of get in there since it has two slanted edges to it. It just allows for you to get in there a lot easier with the side tips, and it really allows for a quicker application. Unlike the Fenty one, which has that one slanted edge and you can't really dig into the inner corner. This one actually was one of the larger ones when it got wet, which I was very surprised and happy about actually, because it just allowed for such a much more quicker and easier application on the skin. I was thoroughly impressed with this one by far. It's also 100% vegan as well too, if that's something you're interested in and you care a lot about. I love that factor. So if you have been wanting to try out the Fenty Beauty sponge, I definitely would probably try out the EcoTools one because it's 10 times cheaper. It's also very similar to the beauty blender and the texture and the way it feels as well too. So going back to a more pricier dupe, I have the Sigma 3D HD blender. This one comes in at about $15, and it really is very unique into all the other shapes that we have here. So Sigma markets this one for you to be able to use as foundation, concealer, baking, cream contour, cream highlight. It has all these multifacets to it for multiple different reasons. You have this rounder edge that you can use for foundation. You have this flat end that you can use for concealer and baking, and then these two sides that you can use for highlighting and contouring. It is a more medium to hard density, but I find it to still be squishable, and I don't actually hate it. I find that it works really well with the density that it is in comparison to all the other harder sponges. It also has a very porous texture like the Beauty Blender does as well too. As far as using it for highlighting and contouring, I loved it. I found that I could really blend out my bronzer very well and get a nice sharp chiseled look. I also absolutely love this for baking underneath my eyes and concealer. You can really get right underneath there and really pack on the concealer well. You also have this nice tapered end that really allows for you to get into the inner corner, and it's not too flimsy like the Real Techniques one where it just flops all over the place. As far as foundation, that's the only con I had with this one. I feel like there's just not enough room to use with this rounder side. I feel like I want to use the end of it almost because this rounder side just doesn't have that much surface area, and it's kind of hard to hold when you're blending it out. I know that's like really not an important factor when looking at it, but I don't want to sit there and feel like I'm just holding the whole thing in my hand and we're just taking forever to blend this out. I got places to be. But I will say that it doesn't absorb a ton of product, and it also retains a little bit of water so you can have that nice dewy finish. But I definitely would say if you're someone that likes the texture of the Beauty Blender, but you want something that's a little bit more denser and doesn't absorb any product whatsoever, this is one I would definitely reach for. Also, if you're like me and you're extremely extra and you like to have a separate sponge for baking or for cream contouring so you can have your foundation sponge but also have your bronzer sponge, this is one I would definitely reach for because you're going to get a nice sharp chisel out of it as well. So one of the more interesting sponges that I picked up was the Essence Super Beauty Sponge. This one was by far the most interesting shape out of all of them, and the one I hated the most. And it's probably obvious why with this shape, but let me get into it real quick. While it is one of the cheapest ones, coming in at $5, it's very soft, it's really nice, and you would think that it would work great, but I honestly just don't understand the point of this shape. I feel like I'm going to rip it apart when I'm cleaning it. It also just doesn't have that big of a surface area on the top or the bottom, so I really feel like I have to sit there and it takes forever to blend out my foundation. On top of that being that it absorbs so much product. This was one that absorbed so much product and it really stained the sponge as well too. It's really hard to sit there and get underneath your eyes because you have this small round circle at the bottom and it doesn't really blend it out very well. I found that my foundation just looked really patchy and it just didn't look even at all. And you can't really use it on the sides either, which is why I don't understand the shape, because they say it's supposed to get into all like the corners and crevices of your face, but I really don't understand how you're supposed to do that with this shape. Maybe I'm just an idiot. Maybe I just don't know and don't have the knowledge to how to work this one, but I really just don't understand the point of it. I feel like I'm gonna break it whenever I squeeze it. It's very dense. It's not that squishy, even though it appears to be, but that's just because of the shape of it. And also, I found that when I first washed it, it smelled like straight chlorine. I don't know why that is, but it worried me. And my hand, like, it still smells like chlorine, and I've washed it like 3 times. I almost feel like there's a coating on top of it that I really can't break through, that just doesn't allow for the foundation to blend out well and just immediately will seep into it. So I don't know what it is. I just could not get this one to work whatsoever. It shears out my foundation too much and just makes it way too patchy. So I'm sorry, Essence. I love a lot of your products. I think you're a great, affordable brand, but this one, I just don't know what you guys were thinking about this. I don't understand. And then last but not least, we have the Sonia Kashuk Makeup Blender coming in at $7. This one, I was really excited to try out because I thought it would be great. I mean, Sonia Kashuk is known for a lot of great products, but this was just a really big miss. It's by far the largest one out of all of them and would be great for bronzer and all over body application. However, for the face, I just don't see it. It's the most texture sponge out of all of them. It's more textured than the Beauty Blender itself, and you can really see how porous it is up close. And I could see it possibly working for body makeup or self-tanning to really blend it out in those certain areas. So not only is it extremely large, it's also the hardest one out of all of them. It's not very squishy at all. And I wanted to like it because of the size. I feel like it would have been so quick to blend out my foundation, but it's just way too dense. It honestly feels like I'm hitting myself in the face with a small child's hand. It's just way too dense for me in my opinion, and it just hurts a little bit too much when I'm blending out my foundation, which is literally the exact opposite of what I want. And even though it doesn't absorb a ton of your foundation, there's just way too many cons for me to use this one. I love how I saved the worst 2 for last. Let's be real here. But if you're wanting a sponge to use for self-tanner and you really want to blend out on your neck and on your face, this might be a great sponge to go with. But when it comes to foundation and concealer, I just don't find myself wanting to reach for this one. It's just way too dense, not squishy enough, and way too textured and porous to use. And that is everything for me today, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts were in the comments down below. What is your favorite beauty blender dupe? I would love to know. Was it one I mentioned? Do we disagree? Agree? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, while you're at it, make sure you guys go ahead and give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe for future videos. Also hit the notification bell so you are notified when I do upload. We're trying to get back to that 2 video a week schedule. Come on, we're trying, people. We are trying. Also, while you're at it, make sure you guys head on over, check out all my social media. It's all gonna be located right up here. So make sure you guys head on over, check it out, say hi. And that about does it for me today, guys. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you are, and I will catch you guys later. Bye-bye!